Good evening, King Candid. My apologies in advance for some interesting acoustics we have going on today, but Shay alone tonight, just me. I have a topic that's been weighing on me a little bit this week that I want to have a discussion about. And it's one that's come up a few times recently, and I feel like it needs to be addressed because we live in what I affectionately refer to as the post-50 Shades world. And that isn't inherently a bad thing. I will do an episode on all the things that are wrong with 50 Shades at a later date, but it did one good thing, which is to bring consensual kink into the mainstream. Let people know about it who maybe otherwise wouldn't have. And it was presented in a relatively palatable format. And that's a good thing. However, 50 Shades also did something else. It was essentially pretty softcore porn, if you actually read the books, which I did. Disclaimer, I did read them. I have not seen the movies, but I did read all 3 novels. And it was essentially softcore porn. And again, this is not inherently a bad thing. But the combination of the two led to a very interesting thing happening. It led to a situation where people associated consensual kink with that softcore porn. And it led to an association that kink is inherently sexual, which in and of itself isn't the worst thing in the world. Because for some people, it is inherently sexual. It is a bedroom activity. It is something that they do for fun and to enjoy sexually with their partner. And that's fine. That's great if that's what's working for any individual or couple out there. Please don't think that I'm trying to rag on what works for you. But it is important to note that it's a different thing entirely when, as we've talked about several times on the show, it's a different thing entirely when we talk about 24/7, when we talk about lifestyle, when we talk about TPE. And this is significant and it's important because I see these discussions come up and these conversations and comments kind of get out there that say that we should keep our status, as submissives especially, in private. And I was recently privy to a discussion online about what level of quote-unquote kink in public is acceptable. Frankly, I will be honest with you, I don't really like the term, because kink is inherently a sexualized term. And I don't like considering what I do to be a kink because it's not for me. It's not an inherently sexualized thing. And that was the entire problem that I ran into in these discussions is because we use the term kink. And I know we use it in the title of the show, but I have a problem with it because kink is an inherently sexualized term. Kinks are sexual. Kinks are things you do in the bedroom. Kinks are things that arouse you or contribute to your pleasure in that way. And that's a great, amazing, wonderful thing that people can share with each other. But when we use the term kink for 24/7 lifestylers, it feeds a misconception. It feeds an idea that everything about what we do is sexualized. I have myself personally been literally told that I shouldn't wear my collar in public because the only way it's acceptable or okay to wear a collar in public is if its, quote, true purpose is not obvious. I'll be honest with you, my collar between you, me, and the 4 walls, my listeners, is not remotely subtle. I wear a stainless steel collar. It's a flat plate collar. It's stainless steel. It has a ring, an O-ring in the front. It's not subtle. And its true purpose is not obvious, I would say, unless you know something about it. But it's not obscured either. And that's something to keep in mind. So when you say things like, it's only okay to wear a collar in public if its true purpose is not obvious, and that everyone should be wearing quote-unquote day collars in public, and that's the only acceptable way to do it. See, this is the problem I run into. If you choose, for one reason or another, either because of dress codes at work or because you're just simply not comfortable with it, to wear a day collar, which often takes the form of something more close to more akin to a pendant or a necklace of some description, or a bracelet, something like that. If that is more appropriate for your situation, then by all means, as we say in my house, do you, boo-boo. That is what you should do. And you should definitely have one and wear one if that is what's most appropriate in your situation for whatever reason. But it is important to note that while consent is a huge, huge thing in the world today, and it's a huge, even more huge thing for the lifestyle, because things that we do are potentially more risky or dangerous or intense in some ways than what the non-kinky among us get up to. Consent is a very, very big deal. But the problem is that has extended to this idea that we need others' consent to witness who we are. Now, that I would say, and this is the point that is getting lost in so many of these discussions, it does depend on what you're doing. If you are engaged in kinky play, if you are engaged in impact play or bondage in some way, if you're using ropes, if you're using chains, if you're playing with impact implements, any of those sorts of things, if you are mostly naked or fully naked, if you are engaged in anything remotely sexual, yes, you should restrict that to in private or only in the presence of those who have reasonably consented to being a witness to this. By which I mean people who are, known friends of yours that you're out with, or in a dungeon or play party type setting where people have reasonably consented simply by being there. Those sorts of things, that's an accurate thing. The problem is that when we say, if it is sexual, you need the consent of others around you, that is true. The problem becomes in what we define as sexual. And this is what inspired me today. I don't use the term master in public. It tends to get a little wonky for a lot of people. It's not something they're used to hearing, and it touches off some nerves. And I recognize that, and I can respect that. And it's not something I wish to explain to the neighbors, or people at the store, things of that nature. I don't want to have that conversation, and so it's not a term we use in public. In public, I refer to him specifically as either sir, which I'm from the South, so sir just sort of rolls naturally, and it doesn't necessarily raise any eyebrows, or our code word, which a lot of couples I think used to, and maybe still do, have, is a term that is innocuous to the average listener, but is known to mean something different to yourselves. I've known couples that use love or my love or any number of terms of that nature, certain specific terms of endearment. Maybe you don't use the term baby very often in your relationship, but in public you do, because that won't raise any eyebrows or set anybody off, but you and your partner know that baby means my girl or master, that sort of thing. That's used to be at least quite common, and I suspect it probably still is, but it's something that we do. I don't call him master in public for a variety of reasons, which I explained, but I was told point blank that I shouldn't, and not for any of the reasons that I was giving, but because it was, and I quote, indicative of a sexual control-based relationship. And this is what I wanted to talk about. Maybe it is sexual control for some people. But I would hazard to say that if your relationship or scenario, because not everyone in the lifestyle is in an active relationship with their play partner, if that is primarily sexual control based for you, the chances of those individuals wanting to use the terminology in public, I would hazard to guess, are probably fairly low. Those of us who use the term in public are using it because we use it all the time. Now, as I said a couple times now, I don't use master in public for a number of reasons. I feel it's inappropriate to use in the public setting. But I do use sir in public. And he knows that when we are in the presence of others with whom we are not out, some of our friends we are out with and others we are not, when we are in the presence of those whom we are not out with, that if I say sir or my love, he knows that that means that is the equivalent to me calling him my master. It is something that we have agreed upon. And it's because I don't want to turn it off. Because I can't turn it off. Because it isn't about sexual control. And I think it's really, really, really important. And I think it's super important at this point that we talk about this. Because so often we hear these terms being thrown about that we should keep our kink in private because sexual things are not appropriate in front of others. I would agree that sexual things are not appropriate in front of others. However, my wearing my collar is not sexual. My addressing him with respect and calling him sir is not sexual. And I think that's getting lost. It's gotten lost in the hubbub of this is a fun, kinky, sexy time thing that we do in the bedroom, and this is a thing that adults do in the bedroom to spice things up, etc., etc. And while that's true, that does exist for some people, it has become synonymous that submissive or dominant is synonymous with sexual. And I want to point out, again, for my listeners, that 99.9% of what he and I do on a day-to-day basis is not sexual. It's not about that. It's never been about that. We have a fantastic sex life. I will be honest with you. We really do. However, we would have a fantastic sex life even if you took the quote-unquote kinky aspects of our relationship away. That wouldn't change. And if we stopped having kinky play in the bedroom, or, knock on wood, heaven forbid, we were unable to have sex anymore, the dominant and submissive part of our relationship would continue. And that is the part that I think has gotten lost. It's not sexual when I do these things. When I make dinner, that's submissive, not sexual. When I give him a massage because he's had a rough day and he's feeling the need for it, that is also submissive, still not sexual. And no, I wouldn't engage in sexualized play in public because that would obviously be inappropriate. I am rather fed up with essentially being told that we are doing it wrong because we don't, quote unquote, keep it in the bedroom. We get told that we are exposing people to our scenes. It's another term that I've come to despise as a 24/7 lifestyler. we don't have scenes. Scenes are, by definition, a period of time with a defined beginning and end during which people engage in these dominant and submissive acts and dominant and submissive play. And that's valid. And it's wonderful, and I encourage people to have them. But being told I shouldn't involve others in my scene in public implies that I am having a scene. Scene is, first of all, inherently about play. It is inherently about arousal. It is about attraction and physical acts. Mental as well, but there are physical acts involved when one is engaged in a scene. There are two ways to look at it from a 24/7 perspective. Either we never have scenes, or every minute of every day is a scene. Depends on how you define it. If you are defining it, as I do, as something inherently sexualized or arousing in some way, then we never do. Because our play is, when we decide to have it, there's not really a defined beginning and end. I don't step into and out of a role. If you were defining it as anything that is inherently submissive, then the argument could be made that every minute of every day is a scene for us. Because, again, I don't step into and out of the role. Am I attracted to him in that way? I absolutely am. And I want to, I could spend hours bragging on how amazing I find him in so many ways and how attracted I am to him. However, the difference is, not only is it not all about sex, it rarely is. We have the same sex life as any other couple would, occasionally with a few more implements and toys brought into play, but other than that, the existence of our sex life is really not so different from any other couple. It's the day-to-day life that is different. It's the day-to-day life that changes for us. And it's not obvious. And no, I don't like being told that I can't, or shouldn't, rather, be who I am in public because I don't have consent. And this idea that consent is incredibly important. And I want to restate that again and again and again and again. Consent is huge. Consent is massively important. Consent means so much. However, consent does not and should not, in my opinion, extend to the level that it is being taken in the modern community, the post-50 Shades world, as I call it. No, I do not and will never need consent to call my man sir in public. There's nothing inherently sexual about that. It's inherently submissive, yes, but it's not inherently sexual. No, I do not and will never need nor seek consent to walk out of my front door wearing my collar. It's not sexual. I'm not involving people in my scene because there is no scene to speak of. I'm not exposing people to my sexual play because it's not sexual. And my relationship is not about sexual control. And I think this needs to be stated clearly, unequivocally. We need to be more aware that these relationships exist and that we look a little different and we function a little different, and we should. Am I suggesting that there is not sexual play involved for some people? Absolutely not, because of course there is. There are some people that this is entirely about sexual play. It's about what they do in the bedroom And that is absolutely valid and fine and dandy. And if that is what you are into, then by all means, be into that. I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I am, however, going to say that it is not true for everyone. And I'm not going to say that there aren't some things that we do, even in my house, that are overtly sexual, that shouldn't be done in public or shouldn't be done in front of other people without their consent. We have a violet wand at my house. That is not something that we would bring out in front of other people without talking to them, because it would be inappropriate. That is something that involves me being in a state of undress. It is something that involves physical acts, physical play. And that is inherently sexual. But the terminology, my collar, these sorts of things, those are not inherently sexual, and they don't need to be kept in private. And I think if we ever want to be accepted as a valid and acceptable form of and way of living your life, then we need to stop feeding the idea that what we do is sexual and needs to be kept in private. And that brings me to my next point. We need to stop doing that, because when we do that, we give people the idea, when we say keep it in private, keep it in the bedroom, don't expose it to other people, then we reinforce the idea that we are all some sexual deviants doing perverted things in our houses, and that we shouldn't be around other people. And I think that's dangerous to us as a community. And it's particularly dangerous to those of us who live our lifestyles 24/7. If I'm not allowed to wear my collar and be the submissive that I am in public, then I'm not allowed to be in public. And that is where I draw a line. That is something that we don't need to be feeding into. We don't need to be contributing the idea that that's something to be, that who we are is something to be hidden. And, for me, the collar is no different than my wedding ring. And you would never, no one would suggest to a married couple that they shouldn't wear their wedding rings in public, because that's an inherently sexual relationship and you shouldn't expose other people to your sexual relationship. That would be ridiculous. I think we can all agree that that would be a ridiculous position to take. Understand that for a 24/7 lifestyle couple, asking us not to wear our collars in public is exactly that. It is saying that our relationship is inherently sexual when it is not, any more than any other marriage is, and saying that we should remove the symbols of our relationship because other people might interpret them incorrectly, and that it is on us to then hide it away in our bedrooms. I'm not taking my wedding ring off to leave my house, and I'm not taking my collar off either. And which brings me to a final point that I feel like we need to address. In the same conversation that inspired this episode and started this conversation, I saw someone say that they were very, very careful about their relationship and how they demonstrated their submission in public. And one of the reasons given was, in addition to, as the previously mentioned, it's inherently sexual, or things of that nature, there's another thing that's been brought up to me a couple of times, which is that we need to hide it away because it's important that those of us who are in heteronormative relationships, shall we say, where it's a male dominant and female submissive, which this show is obviously from the perspective of, because all of the hosts here that have come to talk to you about this so far have been in those types of relationships. And that we should be especially careful because we don't want to give the idea that it is okay or acceptable for men to treat us with a lack of respect as women. And I want to shout from the rooftops, up, down, and sideways in every language known to man. There is nothing about this lifestyle, when done correctly, in the vast majority of, which it is in the vast majority of cases, there is nothing about this lifestyle that indicates a lack of respect. By being submissive to him does not indicate that he does not respect me. And that is something that has really bothered me, because it feeds into another issue I've seen coming up a lot, which is this sort of backlash against heterosexual male dominance, and this idea that we in these types of relationships need to be especially careful to keep our relationship under wraps because it's not acceptable for young girls to see us being submissive. And I say to you, phooey on that. I think it is all the more important for us. It is all the more important for young girls especially to see that there are myriad ways in which relationships can be formulated. There are a number of ways that people can interact with each other, and that being submissive or any number of other things, including traditionally feminine, among other things, does not inherently mean that we aren't treated with respect. I think it makes it does it not make it more important for us to hide it away in the bedrooms, it makes it more important that we don't. Because as long as we continue this argument that it's sexual, people don't want to see your sexual kinks, people don't need to be involved in your scene, they didn't consent to that, you need to hide that away in the bedroom. As long as we continue to feed these ideas within our own community, well, if we continue to cannibalize ourselves and feed this nonsense in our own community, we are going to continue to be viewed as perverted sexual deviants by the rest of the world. And we are not. And it's very, very, very important to me that we stop doing that to ourselves. And it's bad enough that we've had to fight this perception of us as being these, perverted sexual deviants out there, which is so far from the truth, it's not even funny. But we're not only not fighting back against that, we're actively feeding it. And frankly, I'm just not okay with that. We need to understand that what we do for a lot of us, and like I said, as I've said in every episode of the show so far, and I will continue to say, if this doesn't apply to you, if your relationship is bedroom only, if you are not in a relationship, just have a play partner, if it is inherently sexual or bedroom based for you, then by all means do that and follow the terms and conditions, so to speak, of what that means for you. But for those of us for whom this is a 24/7 lifestyle, 99% of what we do isn't sexual. And we need to stop telling people that it is. So the next time you see a conversation online or anywhere else wherein someone is talking about the idea that wearing a collar in public or using the milder forms of titles or honorifics or any number of other little gestures that we do that are submissive is inappropriate because people didn't consent to being part of your scene, please stand up. I am out there fighting the good fight, and I know that my co-hosts are too, and I'm asking that any of my listeners do the same. When you see these things being said, stand up, say no. What we're doing isn't sexual any more than any other relationship, any other marriage is. And no, we don't need to hide it. And that consent matters between us, but we don't need consent to exist. And that's my final thoughts on it. We don't need consent to exist. And existing, for me, is submissive.